Yes. Just let Emily in. Hi, Emily. Thank you for coming. Good timing. Right. I am just waiting for my slides to come up on screen. This is always the good fun of doing something live. Okay, I hope everybody can see my slides now. And it may be that you can all see my notes as well. Okay, right. Well, someone gave me the thumbs up. Good. Can everybody see them clearly? That's my biggest concern because it's come up quite small on my screen. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so let's get started then. So I hope you all remember the film Bruce Almighty. It's getting a little bit old now, but that I've kind of paraphrased his quote, which was, and that's the way the cookie crumbles. This is going to be, and that's the way the cookies crumble. So okay, moving on. So a little bit about me then. I know a few of you here do know me. There's quite a few of you that don't. I hope you've all got a cup of tea or a mug of tea as well to go through this, because it's supposed to be about the length of a mug of coffee. So I've worked in data protection for around, maybe about 24 years now, and 13 of those have been in the charity sector. I know some of the people on the call are actually in the charity sector. So I've got a lot of experience both in the charity sector and outside of the charity sector as well. Thank you, Hannah. Welcome to the meeting. Just to say the session is being recorded. You can have your camera on or you can have your camera off. It's up to you, but you will need your mobile phone for this session. So do have your phone handy. So yes, I've worked in this session in this area a long. So my slides don't want to move on. This is always good fun of doing it live, isn't it? Okay, so I want to start off just a little bit of a reminder about what cookies are. So what are cookies? Well, you've probably seen this loads of times, but cookies are a little bit of a text file, or they're a pixel, or a little icon, if you want to call it that, that goes onto somebody's on your website and drops onto somebody's device. But, you know I bang on about cookies a little bit, but not all cookies are bad. You couldn't shop online without cookies. And if you use your mobile phone for, say, your banking app, it helps manage the security. So not all cookies are bad. But cookies are actually classified, categorized, whatever you want to call them. Oh, I'm sorry, Stella. I'm not sure why that's happening. It could be because Openreach are digging up the road outside and the signal might be getting a bit bad. Let's bring it a bit closer, see if that helps you at all. Perhaps it's just my voice. If someone, can you all hear me okay? Can someone give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Yep, I'm getting quite a few thumbs up. Stella, I'm sorry, dear, it might be you. Okay, so cookies are basically categorized into 4 areas. They're strictly necessary, analytics, performance or functional, or marketing. But strictly necessary cookies are the only ones you can drop, or your website or your app can drop onto somebody's device without their consent. And strictly necessary has quite a narrow definition. It's strictly necessary to the functionality of the website, not to your organization or business. So an example might be some of your websites might have Google Capture on it, the little box you tick, or it might say tick all the boxes that have got push bikes on. And you might, and the Google says, yes, this is a great tool. It helps differentiate between bots and humans. And the way it works is that when somebody ticks that box, it actually times how quickly somebody ticks the box. If it takes less than a second, it assumes that's a bot. if it takes more than a second, it's because it's tracking where somebody has been over your website. So is that a strictly necessary cookie? Google might argue that it is. Cloudflare might argue that it is. But actually, your website would function without it. It's just that it functions better with it. So actually, Google Capture is a functional cookie. It's not strictly necessary. It just helps improve that performance and functionality. So strictly necessary cookies have a really narrow definition. Anything else requires someone's consent for you to drop those cookies or deploy those cookies to their device. So cookies are all... Oh, sorry, someone else is just arriving. Hi, Lucy. Thank you for attending. I have just started, so just a quick reminder that you can have your camera on or off. It's entirely up to you, but the session is being recorded and you will need your mobile phone to actually participate later. So I was just going to talk about cookie types. So cookie types. A cookie can be defined by its lifespan, its purpose, or the domain to which it actually belonged. And they tend to fall into words you've probably heard. They're either session or temporary cookies that are erased when a user leaves your browser, or it's a persistent cookie, one that stays on somebody's computer or device for a predefined period. And to be honest, that predefined period can be ages. Some of the Google cookies last up to 10 years. That's longer than someone's mobile phone will last. And they're actually broken down into a further type. They're first-party cookies or they're third-party cookies. So first-party cookies are cookies that your organization will set on your website. Third-party cookies are set by somebody else outside of your website. And these are the sort of cookies you may have seen. An advert follows you around the internet. So they are third-party cookies. They're the ones that are considered to be more intrusive. Ooh, and it doesn't want to play again. Nope. So why do you see banners asking for your consent to drop cookies onto somebody's device? So it comes down to two things. PECA, and I'm finding that a lot of small businesses have never heard of PECA, the privacy and e-communications regulations. They've been around for donkey's years. They first came out in 2003. They were updated in 2011-12, and that's when you started to see things like, by continuing to browse our website, we deem that you've given your consent for cookies to be dropped. And it hung around like that till the GDPR came in. When the GDPR came in, basically no more inferred consent. You also have to think about the timing or the dropping of those cookies. I've said you need consent for all bar strictly necessary cookies. So that means when someone lands on your website or your app, those non-essential cookies shouldn't be dropped until they've actually given consent. So how do you know? Well, lots of people these days run something called a CMP or a consent management platform. And this is the sort of banner where it actually says, please give your consent, or okay, or agree to the cookies, or decline the cookies or deny the cookies. So lots of people are running CMPs, and these should be giving people as much choice and as making it as easy as possible to accept cookies as it is to reject them. But I get it. You will see lots of websites where it says, yay, accept cookies in great big letters, bright colours. And then in tiny little red letters on a red background, perhaps, it will say reject cookies. This is all down to configuration and also how transparent and how nice you want to be people, how clear you want to be to people about making them aware that they can actually reject cookies. Now, I just want to flag something else that comes up get asked quite a lot. Why do I sometimes see other tabs that say legitimate interests? And you may have seen this. If you actually go into manage cookies on a site, you'll have consent all nicely defaulting to off. And then there'll be a second tab that says legitimate interest, and they're exactly the same cookies. And if an organisation has something called the Internet Advertising Bureau Transparency and Consent Framework running on their platform, have you ever looked to see how many organisations people's personal data might be shared with? And when you might be thinking, oh, but Bev, there's no personal data being shared. If those cookies are collecting an IP address counts as personal data. So you are sharing personal data. So the use of legitimate interest kicked in more originally with companies based outside the EU, because the EU have the e-privacy directive, very similar to PECA at the moment. But American especially will just say they're doing it under legitimate interest. If you don't want to give your consent, basically bog off and leave the website. However, I am seeing more and more sort of UK companies now doing the same thing, sharing data via cookies under legitimate interest. So I just want to flag, I'm going to do a little bit more on that in a moment, but let's just look at consent first. What does consent mean if you're asking for consent from people? So what I call the high bar of consent. It's got to be to GDPR standards. So for those of you who are GDPR aficionados, it's got to be specific. So people have got to know exactly what they're consenting to. It's got to be informed. So if it's going to be specific, it's got to be informed. So that could be your cookie notice. Now, if you're running a consent management product, you may find that your CMP can auto-generate a cookie notice for you, and you just have to publish it. And that's great. The thing I would say, just be careful of, think of your audience, because if you're, say, for example, your site is aimed at an audience whose first language might not be English, and you've just got this auto-generated cookie notice, how easy is it for someone to understand? So my challenge to you is, if you've got an auto-generated cookie notice, can you read it? Have you read it? And do you understand it? Because if you don't, you've got to rewrite it in a language for your audience. And if you haven't got an auto-generated one, then you need to create one. And that means understanding what cookies you've got on your website. There should be no doubt left in people's minds about what they're consenting to or objecting to. And an interesting part is, theoretically, and I'll come on to Google later, you should be able to evidence what someone has consented to or objected to. Now, what is getting quite interesting at the moment will be Google in a minute. People have the right to change their minds, or have a change of heart over what cookies that they're accepting or rejecting. So again, your consent management product, if you've got one, should give people the option to change their mind. Now, not at the moment, not all consent management products actually give you the evidence that you need. At the moment, some of the ones do. Cookiebot does. If you're running Cookiebot on your website, you can go in, and as a user, I can go into a site that's using Cookiebot. It will give me an ID that's specific to me, and it will say I gave or denied my consent on this date at this time. Great, you've got the evidence. But not all CMPs are doing that unless you pay an extra premium. So go back, if you're running a CMP, go and have a look and see if it actually gives you that evidence. Now, legitimate interest. I mentioned about legitimate interest just now. I think the first thing you have to think about, if you're using legitimate interest for digital marketing and dropping cookies onto someone's devices, whose interest is it in to actually drop that cookie and share information with someone else? If you're running the IAB TCF on your website, data could be shared with 700, 800, 900 different organisations. So in whose interest is it? You should be, if you're going to do it under legitimate interest, you should have done a legitimate interest balancing test. And this shouldn't be skewed, it should be objective. And it's looking at what is your legitimate business interest balanced against the rights and expectations and freedoms of individuals. And if data is being shared under legitimate interest, say IP addresses count as personal data, someone has the right to object to that processing happening. But to actually enact that right, they've got to know it's happening. So you've got to be telling people. So it goes back to that being informed, and the information they're being given is specific. So let's have a quick look at what happens to the data. So it is largely, it's called the ad tech ecosystem, and it is huge. It is still largely unregulated, and it's all about the profiling and targeted advertising via something called real-time bidding. And you may or may not have heard of this. Real-time bidding is a process of selling and buying ad space, which is called impressions, on websites for ad tech vendors to show website visitors. And this is literally bidding. If you want to get your advert in front of somebody, you set your bid price. The ad tech vendor says, I've got 2,000 companies all want to get their ad in front of this type of individual, this demographic, who's bidding the highest, and it happens in the time it takes for a page to load. So that's why it's called real-time bidding. Now, what is the interesting bit and where it can become a bit more privacy intrusive is the bid request generates a data set about the person who's using the device. And that can include information such as their demographic, their browsing history, their geolocation, and the page being loaded. And so this is where data sharing through cookies can be considered to be a bit more privacy intrusive. And you have to start getting a bit reflective here. Is your organisation contributing to the bigger picture of unregulated data sharing? And where does the buck stop? Now, I also want to flag about use of Meta, Facebook, because I'm not sure if you're aware, but if you're using the Meta tracking pixel, which again, I'll touch on in a moment, did you know that you're considered to be a joint data controller with Facebook? Now, they're huge and they've got a gazillion lawyers, and Google's and can you say Google's of pounds? They've got a lot of money behind them. You might be a small organisation and don't even realise that you're a joint data controller with Facebook. I also want to flag, if you're working with media agencies, if you've got a media agency saying to you, you've got to have these cookies on your website, it's the only way to generate income, get your ads out there, do reflect on the efficacy of what they may be asking you to do. Have you evaluated those cookies? Have you looked at where the data's going? And because at the end of the day, if you're the data controller, the buck stops with you and not with your media agency. Look in your contract with them. What does it say about the responsibility for checking out who and where data is going to be shared to? So now this is going to be interesting, because this is where I wanted you to, oh, it's not going to work. Okay, so this, when I've run this without it doing this way, I have a nice little QR code there, and I was going to get everybody to use their phone and actually use the QR code, but it doesn't seem to like it as I'm presenting this in Teams. So forget about that. That's the joy of presenting live. What I was going to get you to do is I ran a poll on LinkedIn a few months ago. I had about 250 people respond to it, and it was aimed at a charity audience, so sorry for the businesses that are on here, but the questions still apply. In your organisation, who is responsible for assessing the privacy impact or doing the due diligence on the cookies you have on your website? And I thought I got quite interesting results there. You know, only just, but the biggest result was I haven't got a Scooby. Then it was the data protection lead, which I was quite pleased to see. And then it was the marketing team and the digital team. What this highlighted to me was actually knowing who is doing what in an organization when it actually comes to due diligence on cookies. I'm sorry we couldn't do the poll. I don't know why it didn't want to work for me. So I want to look at some of the issues making the headlines here. And these were probably from last year now. So the first one was some hospitals, and it was around 20-something hospital trusts. And they had the Google tracking pixel running on their website. Now, the common denominators in the issue that hit the headlines, and this was the Guardian article about them, was about the governance and understanding of how cookies and the tracking pixel actually worked, or rather the lack of understanding. The trust had originally installed the tracking pixel to monitor the recruitment activities and the charity campaigns that some of them were actually running. They were not actually aware that the tracking pixel was sending patient data to Facebook. When the Guardian did a bit more digging, only 3 of the 20 trusts had anything about using the Facebook tracking pixel actually in their privacy policy. And quite a few of the trusts had actually explicitly said, we will never share your data for marketing purposes. And yet here it was happening. The second one that hit the headlines was in the charity sector. That was Mind and some of the other charities. Again, using the Facebook tracking pixel for a purpose that was benefiting them without actually realizing what information and data that the pixel was actually sharing. And the third one was actually several police forces, again, using Facebook for recruitment and advertising purposes, but not realizing the type of data that might be shared with Facebook. So one of the key things, one of my key messages here is how well do you understand what Facebook do with the data that you may share with them through the Facebook tracking pixel. I'm not touching on custom audience or anything like that today because we simply are going to run out of time. If you're going to be using things like the Facebook tracking pixel and cookie, and especially things like the Internet Advertising Bureau cookies, do a data privacy impact assessment on them before you launch, because the ICO has a clear view about what people should be able to understand from what you're doing with their information. So what does good look like? And this is where we get a little bit reflective. A lot of your organizations present as values-based organizations, and you're going to have values and behaviors about how your organization works. So do your values extend to how you treat somebody's data? That's my challenge to you. I used to be at Crisis UK, and I know there's a couple of Crisis people on the webinar today. So hi, guys. But before you actually joined where you're working in Crisis now, and obviously before I left, Crisis had in their behaviours that they would treat somebody's data with dignity. So I think this was a great approach to dignity, data and treating it with dignity, because if you're going to say you treat your customers, your clients, your service users with dignity, why doesn't it apply to how you use people's data as well? But you've got to balance that. It's got to be balanced against your organizational risk appetite in respect of marketing. So the interesting thing comes here. Have you created that dichotomy between, yes, we want to make sure we do the best service to our customers, our clients, our service users, but we need to get the money in. We've got income generation to actually sort. So are you creating a dichotomy there? Do you actually know if non-essential cookies are being dropped to a device before consent is given? I've recently been working with a couple of charities who, great, they've got a consent management product running on their website, but it wasn't until I started doing a bit of an audit for them that we uncovered that the configuration of their CMP wasn't right, and non-essential cookies were actually being dropped before consent was given. So what's the point in having a CMP in that case? And also, do you know what cookies you've got on your website? I did a huge piece of work for a very big charity last year. Very, very big website. There's something like 1,800 pages on it. And they had well over 200 cookies on their website, and they had their hands up. And the reason they brought me in is they didn't know what those cookies were, how long they've been there, what they were doing. So they got me to do a real deep dive for them. And have you actually, as an organisation, looked at the risks those cookies may pose? Because again, that goes back to understanding what you're using. So I'm going to have to speed up a bit because I'm trying to cram in a lot in the last few minutes. So cookie scans, are you doing them? Have you got a CMP? You're going to struggle to do a full cookie scan if you haven't got a CMP running on your website. And if people want to have independent conversations about what CMPs to use, there's loads out there, some far more expensive than others. But what cookies are you using? And are they actually driving your marketing strategy, or are they just something you've been told you need, but you're not actually using? If you don't have a CMP, I'd recommend you get one. Do you need cookies on every single web page, or can you make some cookie free? If you've got cookies on every web page and some of those pages are targeting more vulnerable website visitors or children, it's a bit tricky, but can you get the cookies taken off those specific pages? Do you have a governance structure about how you review what cookies are going on? Are they actually needed? Who is accountable and responsible for those cookies on your website? And map the risks as far as you can in what is still quite a highly unregulated industry when it comes to the ad tech ecosystem. So what is happening and what does the future hold? So this might look really tiny, but I just want to flag privacy first browsers. Now, you may have seen DuckDuckGo advertising on the telly. I personally use Brave a lot because it automatically blocks cookies and third-party trackers. Firefox and Safari have been blocking third-party cookies and trackers since 2017, and they hold roughly 20 to 25% of the market. That means for every £100 you spend on digital marketing, 25% of that is completely blocked already. So you're wasting money already. What this little graph is probably not showing you that well is the volume of cookies and tracking pixels and scripts that are being blocked by privacy first browsers. The biggest one on the left-hand side, funnily enough, is Facebook. And then this is what's going to start happening into next year, because next year, Google Chrome, they're finally doing it. They're dropping third-party cookies. So that, and as they still hold a huge chunk of the market, it means roughly of that £100 you spend on digital marketing, you're losing 20% because of Safari and Firefox. You're possibly losing up to another 70% because Google Chrome is starting to block third-party cookies. So in the UK, the Data Protection Digital Information number 2 bill looks like it's actually going to complete its journey before Parliament breaks for the summer. There's a PECA amendment in there, which means analytics cookies won't need consent. And for the charity people on the call, it will also mean charities can start using a soft opt-in for digital marketing. We can do a whole session just on that. I haven't got time to go in it today. There may be some other cookies that won't require consent, but that still needs a bit more clarification. And then right, Meta, Facebook, first ban in the EU. Let's backtrack a bit. The Facebook tracking pixel is not allowed in the EU without explicit consent. So Meta, you may have seen, came up with consent or pay earlier, end of last year, earlier this year, which is going to be interesting. So if you're going to use Facebook, for example, as a user, if you don't want your data used for targeted advertising purposes, you're going to have to pay to use Facebook or Instagram. Then, just more recently, the European Data Protection Board issued an opinion that consent or pay doesn't meet GDPR standards, so it's all up in the air again. And then more recently, our very own ICO is seeking views on whether the UK should adopt a consent or pay approach more generally in the UK. So I thought that was an interesting one. So just to finish off, I put this extra slide in. So for those of you who use Google Analytics, please don't run away because this is quite new. OK, so Google Analytics is illegal or tantamount to illegal in the EU. The first fines for using it were recently issued, and you may think doesn't apply to me because I don't operate. I'm not an EU-based business. It also applies if you're a UK business and you serve an EU audience. Now, Google Universal Analytics is starting to close down now as Google moved to GA4. GA4 is positioned as being far more privacy centric, and I've got a whole load of stuff on it, but I haven't got time to fit it all in now. So the thing I want to point out to people, though, is last month, the EU Digital Markets Act passed in the EU. Now, it only applies to EU businesses, but Google themselves are now pushing their updated EU consent policy because that covers the UK. Now, the issue here is Google, going back to that evidential consent, Google are now saying you've got to be able to evidence your consent. And if you don't have a CMP running, then what Google are saying is that they may actually stop your organization's access to Google products. It will take them a while, but the products that are affected are all these. So if you're using any of these products, you don't have a CMP running that collects evidential consent, you're not meeting Google's terms and conditions. And Google are saying they're going to self-police this. Now, they're going to have AI crawling all over the internet and looking for compliant and non-compliant websites. Yes, it will take a while to find yours if yours isn't compliant, but I'm just flagging, you know, now it's time to do something. So I feel like I've absolutely whizzed through that, too much to fit in half an hour properly. At least the QR codes come up on that. If you've got dedicated questions, just drop me an email. I'm always happy to jump on a Teams call for half an hour. And I pulled together a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek cookie quiz. So if you scan the QR code, that'll take you to my little cookie quiz. It's just a dozen simple questions, and that will give you an idea of your own organisational compliance. So I'm going to escape at that point, if it will let me escape, and it won't, so that's all good. Thank you, Michelle. I know I've run over. I know people are probably going to have to run off now. If anybody wants to stay on the call, happy to have a quick 5 minutes. But I hope that whiz through did give you something to think about, especially in terms of where you are in terms of governance. Do you know what you've got and know what you're doing with cookies? So thank you to the people who came. I'm really pleased so many people turned up. And hopefully I'll see you again next month, because next month's session is all about risk management. So thank you for coming, folks. Bye.